Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Trevor with Maker Experiment, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about laser lenses. Let's get into it. Before we get into the video, I want to thank Engraving Concepts for making this video possible. They've been supporting me in a few of my videos in the past, and they really make it possible for me to spend the time to do these kind of videos where they're information, they're educational. So I just want to give them a shout out and thank them for helping me to bring this content to you. They are one of the distributors for the Epilog laser engravers. So if you are interested, I will leave their links in the description below so that if you're in their sales zone, they can help you out. As some of you probably know, there are different lens sizes for lasers. Some of the most common ones I see are 1.5 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, and 4 inch. Now, just looking at these, you may not know what the difference is or why you would need to use each one. And that's the purpose of this video. Here I have two different lenses. I have a 2-inch lens and a 4-inch lens. Other than the coloring, you don't see a whole lot of difference. The design's the same, the housings are the same, and they're really only labeled with a little engraving on it to differentiate the two. Depending on the company, there may be a wider selection of sizes, there may be different color coding, and different things to differentiate the lenses themselves. But across the board, regardless of company, the reason you would use different lenses are going to be the same. The first thing I want to touch on is what the purpose of the lens is. If you've ever used a laser machine, you'll see that the laser source bounces off a series of mirrors. Then the last mirror goes through a lens which focuses the beam into a spot that then is used for all of your machining. So the purpose of the lens in general is to focus all of that energy, all of that power, and produce the result on the laser machine. The lens itself has two sides. It has a concave side and a convex side. The convex side is going to be more of a curve or dome that's on the outer side. What's going to happen is that's going to be on the top, and all of that energy is going to be focused through that convex side. It's going to be directed in towards the middle, and that will have a different focal length for where that converges into one spot. Now, depending on the lens you're choosing, that distance is going to change, hence the difference in numbers. So a 1.5 inch, that optimal distance is going to be 1.5 inches. If it's 2 inch, it'll be 2 inches, 3 inches, it'll be 3 inches, and so on and so forth. And that's the purpose of the different numbers. It's going to be that different focal length. So if you're using a 1.5 inch lens, the focal length will be 1.5 inches. If you're using a 4 inch lens, the focal length will be 4 inches. I have both a 2 inch lens and a 4 inch lens for my laser. This is the 2 inch manual focus gauge. This one is for the 4 inch lens. As you can see, the 4 inch lens is much longer than the 2 inch lens, which allows for a variety of different things. Your first question is probably, why on earth would I need a different lens? And there are a variety of reasons. So standard on the machines, typically you'll have a 2 inch lens. So a 2 inch lens is standard on my machine here. A lot of other people will have 2 inch lens as standard on theirs because it's a good all-around lens. If you have a 2 inch lens and you're doing everything you need to do, you may not need another lens. At the small end, let's say a 1.5 inch lens. That's going to be very good for very detailed engraving, but it's going to be a little worse for cutting. What I mean by this is if you have an image that is, say, 1200 dpi, and you want to engrave that, a 1.5 inch lens will be your better lens. The reason for this is because the spot size that comes out of the lens is much smaller. When we get to the examples later on, you'll see what I mean. But if you have super detailed engraving with a very intricate design, the spot size will be a lot smaller on that 1.5 inch lens than it would, say, a 4 inch lens. and would be more ideal for those intricate engravings. Now, the adverse side of that one is the cutting is going to be a little bit worse because it's not really the best operation for that lens. Cutting is going to be pretty good at about 1/16 of an inch. Anything thicker than that just won't perform as well as, say, a 2-inch lens or a 3 or 4. The 1.5-inch lens is really only for engravings that are going to be greater than 600 dpi. Otherwise, it's kind of just overkill. If you're doing mostly 400 dpi images or even 500, the 1.5-inch lens is just going to be an overkill lens. And I actually don't know a lot of people that own that lens. Most people just get by with a 2-inch lens. But again, if you have something super intricate, the 1.5-inch lens may be for you. The next lens is the 2-inch lens. As I talked about a little bit ago, this is the standard lens size. It's the more common one that you'll see, and it's going to be the first one that I test on my machine. Now, this lens is pretty much the good all around. It's both good for engraving and it's good for cutting. It can engrave images really well up to about 600 dpi. Once you get over that limit, that's where you might want to step into the 1.5-inch lens. And it does cutting really good up to about 1/4 of an inch. And the next one I want to talk about is the 4-inch lens. So the 3 and the 4 are about the same in my book. The 3 is going to be a little worse at engraving than a 2-inch when it comes to the DPI limit, but it's going to be a little bit better at cutting. And then the 4 is going to be better at cutting, but again, a little bit worse for engraving. So the 4-inch lens is going to be good for cutting operations. It's still good for engraving detailed designs, but your DPI limit is going to be lower. So whereas a 2-inch lens might be good up to 600 DPI, a 4-inch lens might be good up to 400 or 500. Once you start getting further than that, the 4-inch lens has a much larger spot when it hits the material than a 2-inch lens will. So if you get super intricate details, they'll start to overlap each other and the detail of your design will just go away. And I'll show you an example of that here in a little bit. But that gives you a little bit of history as to why you might choose a different lens and what those lenses are for. If you have any questions about the lenses, put a comment in the description below and I'll do my best to answer those. And going forward, what I want to do is show you how you would change a lens, how you'd swap it out, and then show you a few different comparison engraving examples as to when you may be able to use one but not the other, to give you a better feel as to why the both are needed or what you could do with one that you can't do with the other. So let's go through and I will show you how you change a lens. All right, so this is the Epilog Fusion Edge 12. Now on here you'll see this cover that I'm going to take off, and then the lens carriage is right here. So what I need to do is I'm going to crack the top screw loose. You don't have to pull it all the way out. Go ahead and crack the bottom one loose, and you can just swing this cover out of the way and then tighten it back on. This will give you access to the actual lens itself. So the thing that's holding this lens in is going to be both a nut on the bottom here, as well as this cover. Next, you want to take your focus gauge that they give you and stick it into one of the circles that are machined into the side of this nut ring. So they made it so the focus gauge will fit right in. Go to the left to loosen it, and then you should be able to move the lens in and out slightly. The other thing we need to do is go ahead and take this air hose off just by pulling it off. And then you can slide your lens right out. So if you haven't seen this before, this is the lens assembly for the Fusion Edge. You have the nose cone here. This spot here is where the air comes into the lens from your air assist. You have your nut ring here that helps tighten it to the housing. This black part here that actually holds it as a register into the rest of the carriage. And then if you look down in here, there is your lens. So again, the convex side is facing towards the top here, and the concave side is facing towards the bottom, so the laser can go through and then collect itself and go down through the bottom. Okay, side by side, here are the two lenses that I have. The one on the left is the one I took off. It's the 2-inch. The one on the right here is the 4-inch. You can see the marking there on it. The 4-inch is the updated version that has a nose cone that you can take off. And they look about the same length, about the same distance. If it wasn't for this marking, you probably wouldn't know which one is which. Because I think even the new ones, this is all black as well. It's not this brass gold color. So once you have the first lens off, you just take this one. You'll see the short side here. You'll slide that into the slot on the front of that lens housing. And you'll slide it all the way to the back. Once you slide it all the way to the back, just hand tighten that nut until it stops. And then once it stops, you can use your focus gauge to tighten it the rest of the way. Just make sure that it is snug. Do not try to over tighten it. Just make sure that it doesn't move anymore. Then you just reverse the process from before. You'll put the air hose on. Then you will loosen the lens cover, slide it back into place, tighten that down, and then you're good to go. Then you will need to use the 4-inch manual focus lens when you're doing all of your work. You cannot use autofocus anymore unless you set it up for the 4-inch lens. And you can't use the 2-inch focus because it won't work. So make sure that you are using the correct manual focus gauge for the lens that you are using. Now that we've gone over what the lens is, what the differences are between the sizes, and how to change them, I'm going to cover a few different comparisons to show you why you might use one over the other. The first comparison I want to do is an intricate design comparison. What I'm going to do is take a very intricate design. It's about 2 inches in diameter, maybe slightly different. And I'm going to engrave it using the 2-inch lens, and again, using the 4-inch lens. Now, I'll probably start with the 4-inch lens first, and then I'll go on to the 2-inch lens. But I will show you the comparison after that, so you know what they look like. But there's a few things you want to consider when you are machining with the different lenses. So out of the factory stock, it comes with preset settings that are meant for a 2-inch lens. When you start using a 4-inch lens, you may have to adjust your settings. For things like engraving this wood, I know that I decreased the speed so that the 4-inch lens moves a little bit slower, which helps the engraving show up better. Now, if you don't adjust the settings slightly, you may get an instance where your 4-inch lens doesn't machine at all. Just keep that in mind when you're going through this, that if nothing's happening or machining doesn't happen with the 4-inch lens right away, you may have to adjust your settings. I know this because I did it. So just make sure that you're paying attention with that and just adjust them accordingly. With all of that in mind, let's hop into the first comparison, where I'm going to engrave a detailed design with the 4-inch lens first, and then I'm going to do it with the 2-inch lens after. The design is set at about 500 dpi. It's about 2 inches, 2.5 inches in diameter or so. And I'm going to go ahead and show you what it looks like, and then compare the results after. So you can see while machining, they're not that much different as far as what they look like at a high level. It's not until you go to look in the details that you're going to see these differences, but you'll see in the machining process, they look about the same. They are very different as far as how far they are from the laser lens or the focal length, as we discussed earlier. But you can see that The 2-inch lens is going to be much closer to that lens assembly. The 4-inch lens is going to be much further away. Now that the first comparison is done, here are the results, and I will show a close-up of these just so you have a better understanding. Here is the 2-inch lens. So as you can see, some of the details are very small. It's actually so small that if I get closer to my lens, it starts to go out of focus. But you can see that the details are there. There's a lot of small, intricate little areas. And then over here, I have the 4-inch. So there are a few key things that I want to compare. Now, again, remember, this one is the 2-inch. This one is the 4-inch. In the middle, you'll see what looks like larger burn marks in the middle. This may be hard to see on camera with the focus going in and out, but here you'll see that a lot of that detail is gone. There's not as much here in the middle, whereas on the 2-inch lens, you can see there's a little bit more wood left on that one as well. Whereas on the 4-inch, it's gone. So keep that in mind. There's also up near the top where we have these intricate details at the tips of these points. The 4-inch lens, again, because the spot size is larger, it kind of just obliterates them. It gets rid of that detail. Now, from a distance, they look good. They both look really good. But if you know the original design and you know what's supposed to be there, you'll see that those items are in the 2-inch design, and some of those intricate parts are missing from the 4-inch design. So again, this was done at 500 DPI, so keep that in mind. Not a huge difference. I would say that it's not worth the money to buy a 4-inch lens or a 2-inch lens based on this kind of difference. But just wanted to show you what that engraving comparison looks like. Now that you've seen the detailed engraving comparison, I want to show you an object that is going to be pretty much impossible on a 2-inch lens and will be possible on a 4-inch lens. So this is a wooden container from Walmart, actually. So as you can see, it's got a swivel top and it's got a little spot down here. Now, I want to engrave the bottom of this. So this distance is about 2 inches down to the bottom. Now, once I use my manual focus gauge, this is going to be almost impossible to do on a 2-inch lens. So what I want to do is show you how I would set this up. I'm going to attempt to engrave it on the 2-inch lens so that you can see what happens, and then I'm going to attempt to engrave it on the 4-inch lens and show you what happens with that. This is the box that I want to engrave. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and open that up, and I want this design to essentially be like this, where this is the top, this is the bottom, and my design goes in the middle. Now, when I'm using the 2-inch lens, I'm going to lower the bed. And if I bring the 2-inch lens over, you will see that it is too high and it's going to hit this item. So if I go here, it's hitting right now. So if I lower the bed until it no longer hits, like this, and I bring that forward and add my manual focus gauge to this, you'll see that I don't even meet the top of the item. So when I go to engrave this, it's not going to be the right focal length. If I go any closer, it's going to end up hitting the item and crash the laser, and then I'll ruin not only the item, but potentially the lens carriage. So this is an item where a 2-inch lens isn't really going to be possible, but we'll go ahead, I'll show you what it's like to try to engrave this, and then I will switch out the lens and show you the 4-inch lens. So let me go ahead and send over the job, with this focused to the correct 2-inch distance. Now this is the 2-inch lens. Now I was going to use the same item for the 4-inch, so we're going to have to figure out that. I didn't actually expect it to do anything. So this masking that it did, you can see that that's terrible. It looks awful. It's not at all what it's supposed to be, and it's just garbage. This is why you can't engrave an item like this that has a real thick depth to it with a 2-inch lens. Now let's swap for the 4-inch lens and I will do the same thing. Okay, now I have the 4-inch lens installed. I'm going to go ahead and focus it to the correct depth. Okay. Make sure I clear the lid, which I do. And then I'm going to send the job back over and engrave this one. So here's the final result. It's a little hard to tell just because of the extra burning from the 2-inch lens. And I'll try to clean that up a little bit here. But you can definitely see that there's more to it this time. But let me see if I can clean this up a little bit and show you what it looks like a little bit better. Okay, so this is about as good as I can clean up the burn mark. It's just hard to sand down in here. But you can see that now the design actually shows up. So with the 4-inch lens, it is possible to engrave something like this that has that depth of about 1.5 to 2 inches. The 4-inch lens will do it, and it will do it pretty well. So just keep that in mind, that this is an example where a 4-inch lens is critical and is the only way to do it. You will not be able to do something like this with the 2-inch lens. Now that we've done 2 engraving comparisons, I want to do a couple of cutting comparisons. So I'm going to go ahead and cut some 1/4-inch acrylic. Both of them should be pretty identical, to be honest, because both of them should be good for cutting 1/4-inch acrylic. And then we'll really push the machine itself to the limits and see what it's like to try and cut 1/2-inch acrylic, which this laser is not rated to do. So we'll see if it comes out or even works at all. So with that in mind, let's get into that part. Earlier in the video, you heard me say that using a 4-inch lens is better for cutting thicker materials. Now, yes and no. There's a caveat to that. So it works a lot better for things like foam or rubber or things like that. When you get into acrylic and wood, sometimes it can do more burning than it does on like a 2-inch lens. So I've done a lot of experimentation, and some of it may be, me doing settings differently, but you'll see that when I use the 4-inch lens on this acrylic, there was a lot of flame, and the 2-inch lens didn't do that as much. Now, part of that is air flow down far enough to where the laser is meeting the material. So that could mean that I need to up the airflow in the compressor, even though my machine is limited to 30 psi. Now, it could also be something such as maybe the settings need to be slightly different, or it could be that air is getting trapped in the nose cone. Now, there's a variety of reasons things can happen. I will say that cutting 1/4-inch, it does work on both. You can see that there's 2 pieces. The 2-inch lens, in this case, did give me a better result. But I wanted to just be honest that sometimes, even though you'll see documentation saying that 4-inch lens is better for thicker materials, there are some caveats to what materials they're better with. So it can be better for things like foam or things of that nature, like if you had 1-inch thick foam. I did cut some 1/2-inch thick foam, and you'll see that still both of them cut just fine. The 4-inch lens did cut a little bit better than the 2-inch lens, but just keep these things in mind as you're going through. I also have a case where I tried to cut the 1/2-inch acrylic. I will say I was surprised. The 2-inch lens actually did a little bit better than the 4-inch lens. And you'll see that there's more burning on the 4-inch lens than there was on the 2-inch lens. Now again, this machine isn't rated for 1/2-inch acrylic with a 60-watt tube. And depending on how much you fiddle with the settings and try to fine tune it and try to fine tune your focal length and everything else, you may get slightly different results. That's just what I got in this test. Honestly, mostly what I use the 4-inch lens for is engraving thicker materials or deeper items. So things like skateboards, things like bowls, things of that nature, I use the engraving more than anything else. The cutting, I usually just use the 2-inch lens because it does everything I need to do. One last test I want to show you is engraving a tumbler without a rotary. Now, typically you have to have a rotary attachment to spin the mug as you're moving forward. And depending on how far your design wraps around, it may be possible to do it with a jig and just a flat surface. So let me go ahead and show you that example. All right, so the way this one works is I have a little block in here with a V-groove. And what I do is set my mug on it. Now, if I were doing this for a real job, I would make a specific jig. This is just a piece that I have laying around, but it'll work for this purpose. Now it's already focused to the right depth. It's already ready to go. So I'm just going to zoom in here and try to engrave it. So when trying to do the flat engraving, you'll see that the side of the design didn't get captured all the way. The middle of the design is kind of wonky in a couple areas. The left side also has some issues. But that's what ends up happening with a 2-inch lens. So let's switch over to the 4-inch lens and see if we can do any better. So here it is with the 4-inch lens. You'll see that it's still a little iffy on the far right of the design. So you might have to make the design slightly smaller. There is some fine tuning with figuring out how to engrave it while laying flat. But the 4-inch lens makes this possible. So again, the 2-inch lens, it only really hit the first part of the edge here. On the 4-inch lens, it went all the way out to the side. So you capture a lot more surface area with the 4-inch lens than you do with the 2-inch lens. So this is mainly the kind of stuff that I use a 4-inch lens for, is for engraving curved objects like this, or like flasks, or skateboards, or things like that. And most of the cutting I still do with a 2-inch lens. Now that you've seen a lot of comparisons, you're probably asking, what is the main reason for using these different lenses? Now, the 2-inch lens really is a good all-around lens. It comes on the machine, it's a great one to use. But there are a couple instances in my mind where I would use a 4-inch lens, where a 2-inch lens just won't work. In those cases, that would be items like the box that we engraved, where I have to engrave down a certain depth. This would also include things like wooden bowls, or anything that has a depth where you're going to end up hitting the rim or some part of it with a shorter lens. Another example is going to be mugs, where you can engrave these flat. So you will see that some suppliers offer jigs to engrave mugs flat. What they don't always tell you is that it requires a 4-inch lens to do so. So I have engraved mugs using a 4-inch lens. You just have to figure out how much of your logo can actually wrap down the edges and how to adjust for that while you're focusing the lens in. A 2-inch lens just doesn't work as well for that application as a 4-inch lens would. But if you don't have the money to invest into a rotary attachment, a 4-inch lens with a flat bed is a great way to do mugs. When it comes to cutting, I honestly use the 2-inch lens for pretty much everything. It's great. It's a great all around. It's meant to go on the laser, and the wattage is meant for 1/4-inch material, and it cuts 1/4-inch material great. So there's not really anything to mess with there. If you are doing things like skateboards or anything that is going to be curved, like a flask, that's where a 4-inch lens can really come into play and help you a lot. So keep that in mind for applications. It's definitely not a lens for everybody, and there are certain things that a 4-inch lens can do really well for engraving when it comes to those deeper items, the curved items, things like that, that a 2-inch lens just won't work on. But hopefully that gives you some insight into why you would use different lenses and what those lenses are for. Hopefully this video has been helpful. If it has, I would appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so that you know when I come out with new videos. Now, depending on where you're researching and who you talk to and what machine they're using and what lenses and everything else, everybody's going to have their own opinion. Now, what I showed you in this video is real tests in real time, showing you what is going on and what I experience. Now, there may be slight differences in settings that you could do or focal distances you can do to get slightly different results. But in my experience, the 2-inch lens is a great all around. The 4-inch is going to be better for engraving those deep items or curved items where the 2-inch lens just doesn't reach far enough. But again, you're going to get opinions from everywhere. People are probably going to say I'm wrong. Just keep in mind that you need to do your own evaluation with your own machine and see what works for you. Hopefully this video has been helpful. If it has, I would appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so that you know when I come out with new videos. If you have ideas for future videos, leave them in the comments below. I'm always looking for new ideas. And be sure to check out my Instagram @MakerExperiment, where I share this kind of stuff along the way. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you in the next one.